All right. Good afternoon, folks. My name is Amy Perlman. I'm a urologist and men's health specialist at the University of Iowa Hospitals and Clinics. And I have a very special guest with us today on our STEMinar series. I have Bradley Hawes, and he has his master's in business administration and serves as the associate vice president for finance and is the chief financial officer for UI Healthcare. Mr. Hawes, welcome to STEMinar.
Thank you. I'm very, very excited to be here. Appreciate the invitation.
You have a lot of acronyms and in your name. So just give us a rundown. What does it mean? What is like the 2-sentence summary of what it means to be Associate Vice President for Finance and CFO?
So in an academic medical center like we have here, they usually consist of a medical school, a hospital, and a physician group. And so I am the lead finance official for all three of those entities, which means I'm responsible for budgets, financial analysis, billing, collecting bills, where do we spend our capital, how do we borrow money, all of those kinds of things for those three entities.
Wow. So you make a lot of important decisions on a daily basis. Tell us, what does a typical workday look like for you from the time you wake up in the morning to the time you go to bed at night?
Oh, that's starting early. Well,
what time are you waking up? Let's start there.
Usually 6:30. Like to get up and get going. It's actually the quiet time of the day. Mm-hmm. I spend most of my day actually, and my kids ask me this question, so maybe they should watch this broadcast, but I spend most of my day in meetings actually. And so in every meeting, there are different perspectives. There might be marketing, there might be a physician, there might be a nurse or even a patient. And I bring kind of the finance perspective in those meetings. Some of the meetings are with my own team where we're planning and analyzing. Some of them are cross-functional teams. The meeting that I had just before this one was with the chair of family medicine and a surgeon, and talking about how are we going to grow our primary care within our market. So it's kind of an interesting question, and I don't mean to go on too long, but when I first started my career, I was in a cubicle, and I was, and I'll come back to this term, crunching numbers all day long, analyzing different things. And I'm a pretty social person, and so I was like, gosh, this is driving me crazy. I can't do this for my whole career. And I used to long for the day when I could be, working with other people. And I got, assigned to a project. I still remember trying to decide whether we were going to lease cars for our employees. We had that system had 25 hospitals, so a lot, very big, or whether we would let them buy their own and we would reimburse them. So there were financial questions. I was so excited to be on a team and do work that way. Now, when I can not be in a meeting and actually sit down and do analysis myself, it's kind of refreshing and recharges. So it's funny how things change over time, right? But most of my day is spent in meetings and helping analyze, make recommendations, and occasionally making the decision.
So when you were in high school, did you like being involved in group projects? It seems very similar to what you may have done in high school. And what role did you play in those group projects?
Yeah, I don't know that we did a lot of group things. It probably says how old I am, but I always play sport. I was always involved in sports, team sports, and so everybody has a role. You hope to play your role the best. You got to learn to play in the sandbox with other people, or you're going to fail. And so I always felt like that was a good training ground for team-based activity. Sometimes, and I think this sometimes of physicians, you live and die based on your individual accomplishments, and sometimes there's not enough team success or team failure. Mm-hmm. It's a team, management now is a team sport for sure.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's talk more about your high school days. So what was your favorite math class in high school? Because we're talking math today. So was there a math class that you enjoyed?
Yes, it wasn't pure math,
Mm,
but the class that I remember the most was consumer economics.
mm,
And it was kind of this gruff football coach, which made it kind of fun. But a lot of the concepts around how do you take out a mortgage or a car loan, and how much interest are you paying on that kind of a thing, what's your credit rating look like, and just really practical kind of uses of math. and
mm.
and I remember keeping that notebook for a long time and going back and referencing it, because it taught early, when you just kind of don't know how the world works. It was interesting to learn those concepts.
Mm. So, what I'm hearing from you, Mr. Hawes, is perhaps if others want to have jobs like you have, they don't have to love their algebra and calculus math classes. Am I right? Is that what I'm hearing?
You're absolutely right.
But they
I'm in
have to
that
have an
category.
appreciation for the practicality of how numbers fit into the day to day.
Yes, absolutely.
Awesome. Were
So
there other classes you took in high school that you found to be helpful with your current role?
um, my other, well, I think a lot of, and we were talking about this before we got on, education. I think a lot of education has to do with learning to think and to
Mhm.
process. And I have kids now that are in college, and I watch them as they start classes in a semester, and how they learn, this is what the professor wants, and how do I answer this question. So it's not only learning the technical things and the very specific facts, but it's being able to apply them. And they'll often say, this is dumb, this general ed class is dumb, or this calculus is dumb, and I'll never use it. And I say, that may be true, but what you're learning is to think in a certain way, respond to questions, and then answer. And it's a thought process. And so I think a lot of the reason that people hire for people with degrees or education is they know they've gone through those experiences. They've
Mhm.
learned to think and apply knowledge. Not that you have to remember the quadratic formula necessarily. You'll probably never use that. But you at one point understood the rules and how to apply them.
Mhm.
So I think that's the way I kind of view, including mathematics. In my daily job, I'm not using calculus to get my job done. There are more technical jobs than mine that really get down into really heavy duty math. But I know enough to process the numbers and apply them. Um, looks like you want me to read, there's some.
Yeah, we have a question here. So we have a question that asks, do you think statistics would be a better math class than calculus?
Yes. I think statistics is a hugely important class, and it's a domain that's really important. Understanding sample sizes, understanding how to apply data and information across a broad population is really important, probably more important than being able to calculate the area under a curve.
Mhm.
And so I would say yes.
Yeah, I would agree with you on that one. When we look at research papers and we will define how we manage and treat a patient depending on the outcomes of these research papers, we have to understand, was this statistically significant? And understanding how we come up with those numbers that actually change how we care for patients on a daily basis is critical. It's how we understand the findings of research papers. So I would say, and I wouldn't even make the argument of like statistics is more important than calculus. Perhaps, I mean, all these classes play their own role, but statistics is most certainly an important course. Are there other courses you took in high school, let's say non-mathematics, whether it's English or Spanish or another class, perhaps in the humanities, that you felt help you develop that thought process skill?
Yeah, so two other things that I think are really important. Another one of my favorite classes was physics,
Mm.
and which is interesting. My kids actually prefer chemistry over physics, but I had this great professor who was a race car driver, and he gave us big projects during the semester to apply physics. We had to build a bridge. We had to, build a parachute or a container to drop an egg off a building. We had to build a mousetrap go-kart that was only powered by the mousetrap. And so you applied the things that he was teaching us. And then he had his own stories about his crazy race car drives. But that, I thought that was a way to apply something that, instead of just, the formula of, force equals mass times velocity, he was teaching us how to apply the principles. So that was important. The other thing is, regardless of what profession you choose, I think your ability to communicate and to write will be hugely valuable. And I don't really think you need to go back to a typewriter and the way that old people like me had to do things, but the ability to communicate through written documents is really, really important. And so, that English class that may be driving you crazy, or the papers that you have to write, I think that's great practice and great development.
Absolutely. And so you did 4 years in high school and then 4 years in college?
Yeah, bachelor's degree.
Bachelor's, right. And then you got your 1 year, was it 1 or 2 years of your master's?
Two, yeah.
Okay. And what did you take? What were some of the important lessons or skills that you learned from getting your master's in business?
So I mentioned the term earlier where I said number crunching. Well, let me back up a little bit. So I did a little bit of a unique path into my job. So my undergraduate degree was in political science, so liberal arts, not very quantitative. And so a lot of advisors told me at the time, don't do business and then go to business school for your master's, because you're just duplicating. So pick something that's different, that you enjoy. And so I chose political science. I minored in Spanish. I'm fluent in Spanish. And so I enjoyed that. And then but I knew I was going to go on and get a master's degree. And so, which I think is important. Political science, that's maybe a harder job, threshold. You don't have a skill necessarily, but a lot of the political science majors go to law school or go to an MBA, those kinds of things. So, but I wrote in political science, I wrote a lot. And so back to that skill. So in the master's program, the first year is required classes, and they go across the domains of human resources and marketing and investments and, kind of hardcore finance. And then in the second year, you can emphasize the discipline that you think you're most interested in. And I stayed in finance and investments, and I've enjoyed it. I think it's been, really important. What I think that I do well in my job, which has allowed me to be the CFO, is I feel like numbers tell a story. And so I'm able to take a lot of numbers and analysis and complicated data and translate that into a story that means something to people that maybe don't like the quantitative or don't want to look at 100 different numbers to make a decision. So when I crunch the numbers, I'm taking a lot of different things and saying, here are the 2 or 3 numbers that really matter. Being able to communicate those then to my teammates or my boss or to the board of directors ends up being a really important thing.
Wow, that's really insightful. What excites you on a daily basis? What are you excited about?
I like well, first of all, I enjoy working with people. So when I look back on a year or a career, or not a career, but places I've been, even school, I remember the people that I worked with, and I remember kind of the big projects that we were able to accomplish. I don't necessarily remember the hard times. I don't remember this assignment or that assignment, the big developments. And so when I get to have the opportunity to be involved in a big project, or something that's going to potentially change a significant part of the business, I enjoy that challenge. It keeps me energized. I don't like doing the same thing every day, all day. I like to have variety. And I'm fortunate in my job that I can go in a day, I can be talking about malpractice. I can be talking about billing. I can be talking about constructing a facility. I could even be talking about, where do we get, cadavers for the medical school. I just have a wide variety of things that come across, and I feel you get value in helping people and doing different things. Medicine, I think, and you would know this better than I do, I enjoy it because I'm not necessarily in banking and just focus on making more money. I feel like we're doing something that helps people, helps society, and in many different ways, whether it's education, whether it's curing a disease, or different doing research to help cure even more people. I think that makes me feel good at the end of the day when I go home.
Yeah, I think, if we were to ask a lot of high school students, 100 high school students, of why they might be interested in healthcare, most would probably say, I want to help people. But as people can help people in any career. And so I think helping people make more intentional decisions of how do you want to help people? What types of decisions do you want to make on a daily basis? Who do you want to help? Do you want to help physicians so that they can care for patients as a physician or a nurse or a medical assistant? Do you want to be a part of the business decisions and have a role like yours? Do you want to be involved in research and have a role like mine? And so there are all these positions in healthcare, and some of those decisions on career paths, they start in high school. And I hope that some of these talks with STEMinar and some of the outreach activities we do will help people tease that out. What is your message? We're going to wrap up today's session. What is your message for high school students? What do you want them to come away with when it comes to your experience?
Uh, Enjoy your time in school, but that doesn't mean avoiding class and avoiding homework, and that's a terrible thing. Learn what you need to learn in a way that's fun. Get engaged. The things that are sometimes hard and we only do them when we have to, I think we miss an opportunity to really get in and look at, why is this important? And people have dedicated their lives to these different subjects. There are really cool things that you can learn in a lot of different ways, and that way you find out what you enjoy and what you want to pursue as you go forward. It's hard even when you start college or graduate school, or even your first years as a resident or physician. People say, what do you want to do for in your life? And I think that's really a hard question to answer, but you'll have a much better job, much better odds at picking the right thing if you've experienced in depth different things. And so shadow people, go visit businesses, do things like this, listen to these kind of webinars so that you get a feel for what people do and whether you like that or not. Because what I do actually at the end of the day might be terrible for you, but how do you know unless you've tried that? And so take advantage of those opportunities to learn and develop and to grow. And if you end up not liking it, what you've added to is your experience, and you can apply that experience in the next thing you try.
I love it. So here are the summary points for today's STEMinar with Mr. Bradley Hawes. Maybe learn for the sake of learning. Variety is the spice of life. Learn how to write and communicate, be engaged, and be curious. That wraps up today's STEMinar. We appreciate your time, and you can tune in for additional STEMinar and STEM events on our website. Have a great afternoon. Thank you, Mr. Hawes.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.